The Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years through one simple principle: absolute terror. Their massive black ships dropped from hyperspace like death itself, casting shadows over worlds that had never known war until that moment. The sight of their angular vessels was enough to make entire civilizations surrender without firing a single shot. Admiral stood on the bridge of the dreadnought, his four arms crossed behind his chitinous back as he watched another human settlement grow larger on the. These humans were different from the other species they had encountered. Most races begged for mercy the moment ships appeared in their system. The humans had actually sent a transmission asking if the Empire needed directions. "Sir," his communications officer clicked nervously, "the human settlement is requesting permission to send up a delegation." His mandibles clicked in amusement. How refreshingly naive. Very well, let them come aboard. They will learn fear soon enough. The shuttle bay doors opened to receive a small human craft that looked almost comically primitive compared to their advanced technology. When the airlock cycled, three humans stepped out wearing simple clothes rather than protective gear or ceremonial armor. The lead human was unremarkable by any standard average height, brown hair, and wearing what appeared to be a casual blue jacket. "Welcome aboard," the human said with a wide smile that showed his teeth. "I'm Captain, representing the Terran Colonial Authority. Thanks for having us." Studied the human's face. Something was wrong. Where other species showed dilated pupils and rapid breathing when faced with might, this human's vital signs appeared completely normal. His expression was open and friendly, as if he were meeting old friends rather than the most feared empire in known space. "You do realize," said slowly, "that you are standing aboard a vessel capable of turning your entire planet into molten slag." The human's smile somehow grew even wider. "That's quite a ship you've got here. The engineering must be incredible. Mind if we take a look around?" For the first time in his long military career, Admiral felt something he had never experienced before: confusion. This human was either completely insane or operating under some delusion about their situation. No rational being could stand before the might of the Empire and react with such casual friendliness. "Human's voice dropped to the threatening growl that had made countless ambassadors wet themselves in terror. "Do you understand what the Empire is? We have conquered 800 star systems. We have reduced entire species to ash for daring to oppose us. Your little colony exists at our sufferance." Captain nodded thoughtfully. 800 systems? That's impressive logistics. How do you manage supply lines across that kind of distance? We're having trouble just keeping 3 colonies properly supplied. The Admiral's secondary eyes narrowed. This was not how these encounters were supposed to proceed. Usually by this point, alien representatives were either on their knees begging or making desperate offers of tribute. This human was discussing supply chain management as if they were colleagues sharing industry insights. "Perhaps," said with dangerous calm, "you would benefit from seeing what happens to those who do not show proper respect to the Empire." He gestured to his aide, who activated a holographic display showing the destruction of the. The recording showed ships methodically bombarding population centers while evacuation ships fled in panic. Cities vanished in nuclear fire. Billions died in the span of hours. Captain watched the display with obvious interest, occasionally making small sounds of understanding. When it ended, he turned back to the Admiral with that same unsettling smile. "The targeting precision is remarkable," said. "Are those plasma-based weapons or some kind of antimatter system? The energy discharge patterns are unlike anything in our databases." Felt his combat instincts beginning to trigger. Something was deeply wrong here. No species reacted this way to demonstrations of imperial power. Fear was the foundation of their entire system of control, and this human seemed immune to it. "Human," the Admiral said, his voice taking on the deadly undertone that preceded orbital bombardment orders, "I am beginning to suspect you do not comprehend the gravity of your situation. Your species will submit to imperial rule, or you will be eliminated. There is no third option." The human's expression shifted slightly, and for a moment thought he might finally be getting through. But instead of fear, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The human looked genuinely sad. "You know," said quietly, "that's really unfortunate. We were hoping we might be able to work something out." "Work something out?" repeated. "You are in no position to negotiate anything. You will surrender unconditionally or face annihilation." The human sighed and shook his head. Admiral, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about who's in what position here. Before could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. His tactical officer's voice cut through the noise with barely controlled panic. Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures throughout the system. Unknown contacts on all vectors. The main display shifted to show the tactical situation, and Admiral felt his 4 hearts skip beats in perfect synchronization. Surrounding the fleet were hundreds of human vessels, each one radiating energy readings that comprehension. They had appeared from nowhere, as if space itself had chosen to birth a new nightmare. That's the Terran Navy, Captain said conversationally. They've been here the whole time, just waiting to see if we could resolve this peacefully. Stared at the display in horror. His fleet of 50 dreadnoughts, which had never faced serious resistance in 3 of Conquest, was outnumbered 10-1 by ships that somehow made their sensors scream warnings about exotic energy signatures. This is impossible, he whispered. Our intelligence networks span the galaxy. We would have known about this level of military development. The human's grin returned, and suddenly understood why something about that expression had bothered him so much. It wasn't the grin of someone who was happy or amused. It was the grin of someone who knew a secret that was about to ruin your entire day. Admiral said gently, you've been watching us for 200 years. You've seen our little colony ships and our trade vessels. You've our defensive installations and counted our population centers. But you've made one critical error in your assessment. What error? Demanded, though he was no longer sure he wanted to know the answer. Captain's grin grew impossibly wider. You assumed we were showing you everything. The tactical display updated again, and this time Admiral felt something that no military commander had experienced in living memory. Pure, absolute terror. The human ships weren't just numerous. They were technological marvels that made Imperial engineering look primitive by comparison. Energy readings showed power outputs that should have been impossible for vessels of their size. Sensor analysis indicated weapons systems based on principles the Empire's scientists had never even theorized. Your move, Admiral, the human said pleasantly. Would you like to continue with your standard annexation protocol, or should we discuss terms for a more mutually beneficial relationship? For 3,000 years, the Empire had ruled through fear. They had made terror into an art form, weaponized intimidation, and built their entire civilization on the principle that might makes right. In all that time, no species had ever turned their own tactics against them. But as Admiral looked into Captain's eyes, he realized that the age of dominance had just come to an abrupt end. The humans weren't just unafraid. They were the new apex predators in a galaxy that had forgotten what real predators looked like. And they were smiling about it. The negotiations took place in what humans called a neutral venue, a massive space station that materialized from hyperspace as if summoned by some cosmic magic. Admiral had commanded fleets for over 2 centuries, but he had never seen anything like the construction that now dominated his. The station was easily the size of a small moon, its surface covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The diplomatic resolution, Captain explained as their shuttle approached the docking bay. We built her specifically for situations like this. She's equipped with every comfort we could think of for multi-species negotiations. As they passed through the energy barrier that separated the docking bay from space, noted that the barrier itself operated on principles his scientists couldn't identify. No force fields, no magnetic containment, just a shimmering interface that somehow maintained perfect atmospheric pressure while allowing ships to pass through freely. The interior of the station logic. Gravity seemed to operate in localized zones rather than following any consistent direction. Corridors curved in impossible ways, creating spaces that appeared larger on the inside than they could possibly be from the outside. His tactical mind tried to analyze the architecture for weaknesses, but every surface seemed to flow seamlessly into the next without visible joints or construction seams. Impressive, he admitted grudgingly. How long did it take to construct this facility? Captain consulted a device on his wrist. About 14 minutes. We've gotten quite efficient at rapid deployment architecture. The Admiral stopped walking. 14 minutes. Well, the design phase took longer, maybe an hour or 2. But once we had the specifications finalized, the fabrication system handled the actual construction pretty quickly. They entered what appeared to be a conference room, though the walls displayed what looked like real-time views of nebulae and star clusters rather than holographic projections. The table was a single piece of some crystalline material that seemed to contain flowing patterns of light within its structure. "Please have a seat," gestured to chairs that molded themselves to accommodate chitinous frame the moment he approached them. "Can we get you anything? Food, drink? We have a pretty comprehensive database of nutritional requirements." The Admiral settled into the chair, which somehow managed to be perfectly comfortable despite the fact that no other species had ever successfully designed furniture suitable for anatomy. "You seem remarkably well informed about our physiology." "We've been watching you as long as you've been watching us," said with that same unsettling smile. "Longer, actually. We knew about the Empire before you knew we existed." A panel in the wall slid open, and several humans entered the conference room. Recognized them as representatives of different human subspecies: the pale, ice-from-the-rim territories, the dark-skinned desert dwellers from the core colonies, and others whose genetic markers indicated adaptation to environments the Empire had considered uninhabitable. "Allow me to introduce the Terran Diplomatic Corps," said. "Dr. Sarah handles xenobiology and cultural integration. Commander James Harrison manages our defense coordination protocols, and Director Lisa oversees our long-term strategic planning division." Each human nodded politely as they were introduced, but found himself focusing on their eyes. Like none of them showed any sign of fear or intimidation. Instead, they looked at him with what could only be described as professional interest, as if he were a particularly fascinating specimen they were eager to study. "Admiral," Doctor said, her voice carrying the same casual friendliness that had unnerved him during his first encounter with these humans, "we understand that this situation represents a significant paradigm shift for your empire. We want to make this transition as smooth as possible for everyone involved." "Transition?" Mandibles clicked sharply. "The Empire does not undergo transitions. We conquer or we destroy. That has been our way for 3. "Yes," Director said, consulting what appeared to be a holographic display only she could see. "We've analyzed your historical patterns extensively. Very consistent approach: intimidation, demonstration of superior firepower, demand for unconditional surrender, followed by systematic resource extraction and population control." Commander Harrison leaned forward slightly. "The problem is that your entire strategy depends on maintaining technological and numerical superiority over your potential enemies. What happens when you encounter a species that surpasses you in both categories?" The question hung in the air like a weapon waiting to fire. Had been asking himself the same thing since the human fleet had revealed itself, but he wasn't about to admit weakness to potential enemies. "You are assuming facts, not in evidence," he said carefully. "The Empire has faced technologically advanced opponents before." "Have you?" Doctor asked with genuine curiosity. "Our analysis of your conquest patterns suggests you've been very careful to avoid engaging species that might pose a real threat. For instance, you waited until their civil war had weakened their defensive capabilities before moving in. They were bombarded from orbit before they could deploy their fleet. Very efficient strategy, but it does leave some gaps in your actual combat experience against peer-level opponents." Felt his secondary hearts beginning to race. These humans had not just studied his empire's military history. They had analyzed it with the precision of dedicated military strategists looking for tactical weaknesses. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. Captain activated a holographic display that showed a 3-dimensional map of the local galactic arm. Territory appeared as a large red zone, with human space marked in blue. But as the display updated, saw dozens of other colored regions appearing throughout the map territories that had never appeared in Imperial intelligence reports. "These are our allies," explained. "Species we've been working with for the past several centuries, while your empire was focused on expanding in the opposite direction. The Delian technocracy has been developing quantum computing systems that make your AI networks look like mechanical calculators. The collective has perfected energy-matter conversion on an industrial scale. The Etherian symbiosis has unlocked psychic communication across galactic distances." The display continued to update, showing trade routes, mutual defense agreements, and technological exchange programs spanning hundreds of star systems. What had thought was a confrontation between his empire and a single human colony was actually a meeting between the Empire and a coalition that controlled nearly half the galaxy. "You've been building an alliance," he said, the full scope of the strategic situation finally becoming clear. "We've been building a civilization," Director corrected. "One based on cooperation rather than domination, mutual benefit rather than exploitation, shared knowledge rather than hoarded secrets." Commander Harrison pulled up tactical analyses showing comparative military capabilities. "Your empire maintains control through fear and overwhelming force applied against individual targets. Our alliance maintains security through distributed defense networks and coordinated response protocols. In a direct confrontation, your ships are individually powerful but tactically inflexible. Our vessels are designed for adaptive cooperation." Doctor added, "More importantly, our entire approach to conflict resolution prioritizes finding solutions that benefit everyone involved. We're not interested in destroying your empire. We're interested in integrating it into a larger framework that allows everyone to prosper." Studied the data flowing across the displays, trying to identify some weakness in their position that his empire could exploit. Instead, he found himself facing a level of strategic planning that spanned centuries and involved coordination between dozens of species with complementary capabilities. "And if the Empire refuses your integration offer?" he asked. The humans exchanged glances that somehow managed to communicate volumes of information without words. Captain's expression shifted to something that was still technically a smile, but carried undertones that made survival instincts scream warnings. "Admiral," said quietly, "we really hope it doesn't come to that. The last species that chose warfare over cooperation was the hegemony of. They had technology comparable to yours and a military tradition dating back nearly as far." "What happened to them?" asked, though he was increasingly certain he didn't want to know. "They exist," Doctor said carefully. "They're actually quite happy now, but their entire civilization underwent some significant structural modifications. Their leadership discovered that there are things in this universe much more frightening than the loss of political autonomy." The Admiral looked around the conference room, noting details he had missed during his initial assessment. The walls weren't just displaying astronomical phenomena, they were displaying real-time tactical information from across the galaxy. Energy signatures, fleet movements, communication intercepts. The humans weren't just monitoring their own territories, they were monitoring everything. "You've been watching us for centuries," he said, the full scope of their intelligence capabilities finally sinking in. "Watching, learning, preparing," Commander Harrison confirmed. "We knew eventually we'd need to have this conversation. We wanted to be ready with solutions that would benefit everyone involved." Captain leaned back in his chair, that unsettling grin returning. "The thing about fear as a control mechanism, Admiral, is that it only works when your targets believe you're the most dangerous thing in their environment. The moment they encounter something that makes you look harmless by comparison, your entire system collapses." Outside the station's windows, could see his fleet maintaining formation around the human vessel. 50 of the most advanced warships in space, crewed by the Empire's finest warriors, armed with weapons that could crack planets. A force that had never known defeat. And they were completely irrelevant to the conversation taking place in this room. "What are your terms?" he asked finally. The humans smiled, and for the first time since this encounter began, Admiral realized that the expression wasn't threatening at all. It was relieved. They had genuinely wanted to resolve this peacefully. Which, he was beginning to understand, made them infinitely more dangerous than any species that simply wanted to fight. 6 months later, Admiral stood in the observation deck of what had once been the Imperial Dreadnought and was now the research vessel New Horizons. The ship looked almost identical from the outside, but every system had been upgraded with human technology that made their previous capabilities seem primitive. Instead of weapons designed for planetary bombardment, they now carried scientific instruments capable of mapping dark matter fluctuations and scanning for signs of life across entire solar systems. His crew had initially resisted the transition from military conquest to scientific exploration. Were warriors by nature, bred for combat across thousands of generations. The idea of using their ships for peaceful research had seemed like a betrayal of everything they represented. But that was before they discovered what humans meant by exploration. "Admiral," his former weapons officer, now chief science officer, approached with an expression of barely contained excitement. The gravitational anomaly readings are off the charts. The humans were right. There's definitely something artificial in this system. Activated the tactical display, which now showed sensor readings instead of target acquisition data. The system they were investigating appeared empty except for a single red dwarf star and a few rocky planets, but their enhanced scanners detected massive structures hidden within what appeared to be empty space. "Any idea what we're looking at?" he asked. "Unknown," admitted. "But the energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. Doctor thinks it might be a megastructure left behind by one of the precursor species." Captain materialized on the bridge via the quantum transport system that had been installed throughout the ship. Even after 6 months of working alongside humans, still found their casual mastery of technologies the Empire had considered theoretical to be unsettling. "Any luck with the deep scans?" asked, moving to stand beside the Admiral at the central display. "We're detecting structures," replied. "But they're unlike anything in our historical records. Whatever built this predates the Empire by millions of years." Nodded thoughtfully. "That matches what we found in the Andromeda surveys. These precursor sites seem to be scattered throughout the galaxy, but most of them are hidden in systems that appear uninhabitable. We think they were built by multiple species working together." The concept of multiple species cooperating on projects spanning millions of years had been difficult to accept initially. The Empire's entire worldview was based on the assumption that different species were naturally competitive, and that cooperation was a temporary arrangement at best. But his months working with the Human Alliance had shown him organizational structures that functioned on timescales no single species could comprehend. "Sir," his communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission from the Delian research ship Quantum Dawn. They're requesting permission to link their scanning arrays with ours." "Granted," said without hesitation. 6 months ago, the idea of allowing alien vessels to interface directly with Imperial systems would have been unthinkable. Now it was standard operating procedure for joint research operations. The combined scanning power of 3 different technological approaches created a sensor resolution that revealed details invisible to any single ship. The structures hidden in the system began to resolve into distinct architectural features: massive rings circling the star at impossible distances, geometric patterns that suggested engineering rather than natural formation, and energy conduits that seemed to extend through higher dimensional space. "My God," Dr. Sarah's voice came through the quantum communication link from the human ship Discovery. "It's not just a single structure, it's an entire stellar engineering project. They've turned the whole system into some kind of machine." Commander of the Delian vessel added his analysis. "The quantum resonance patterns suggest this was designed for information processing on a galactic scale. Whatever species built this, they were using entire star systems as components in a computational matrix." Studied the readings with growing amazement. The Empire had considered itself the pinnacle of galactic civilization for 3, but they were discovering evidence of engineering projects that dwarfed anything his species had ever imagined. And they were discovering it as part of a cooperative research effort that included former enemies working together toward common goals. "Admiral," Captain said quietly, "there's something else you should know. This isn't the first site like this we've found. Over the past 2 years, our joint expeditions have located 47 similar installations across the galaxy. They all seem to be connected through quantum entanglement networks that operate outside normal spacetime." "Connected how?" asked. "We think they're components in a galaxy-spanning communication system, or maybe something more than communication. Some of our theoretical physicists believe these structures were designed to facilitate consciousness transfer between different dimensional frameworks." The implications were staggering. If an ancient civilization had developed technology for transferring consciousness across galactic distances, the possibilities for exploration and discovery were beyond anything his species had dreamed of. But more importantly, it suggested that cooperation between different species wasn't just possible. It was the only way to achieve technological advancement on this scale. "Sir," announced, "we're detecting an activation sequence in the central structure. The quantum field generators are coming online." The displays updated to show energy patterns flowing through the precursor installation like blood through arteries. Systems that had been dormant for millions of years were awakening in response to their presence, as if the ancient builders had designed their creations to respond to research teams. "That's fascinating," Doctor observed. "The activation pattern requires quantum signatures from at least 3 different technological approaches. It's as if they designed these systems to only function when multiple species work together." Admiral felt something he had never experienced during his centuries of military service: genuine wonder. The Empire's approach to exploration had always been focused on identifying resources to extract and territories to conquer. But this collaborative research was revealing wonders that no single species could have discovered alone. "Admiral," said with that familiar grin that had once seemed so threatening, "we're planning to establish a permanent research station in this system. The Terran Science Council has approved funding for a joint facility that would include human and Delian research teams working together on long-term studies. Would your people be interested in participating?" 6 months ago, Admiral would have seen such an offer as a trap or an insult. The idea of warriors serving under alien command would have been unthinkable. But he was beginning to understand that the humans weren't offering command positions or subordinate roles. They were offering partnerships. "What kind of research are we talking about?" he asked. "Everything," replied enthusiastically. "Precursor archaeology, quantum mechanics, stellar engineering, consciousness studies, dimensional physics. We think these installations might be teaching devices left behind by civilizations that transcended physical existence millions of years ago. If we can figure out how they work, we might be able to follow the same path." The concept of transcendence was not foreign to philosophy, but their traditions had always assumed it was something achieved through individual enlightenment rather than cooperative effort. The idea that entire civilizations might evolve beyond physical existence by working together opened possibilities that no single species could explore alone. "There's one more thing," Doctor added. "The quantum resonance patterns suggest these installations are still connected to something. Wherever the precursors went when they transcended physical existence, they left behind a network that might allow us to make contact." Admiral looked out at the stars surrounding their small fleet. For 3,000 years, his empire had seen the galaxy as a territory to be conquered, with other species as obstacles to be overcome or resources to be exploited. But the humans had shown him something far more magnificent: a universe filled with mysteries that could only be solved through cooperation, wonders that could only be discovered by species working together toward goals that transcended individual ambition. The Empire's rule of fear had lasted because it was based on a simple truth: that isolation and competition were the natural state of galactic civilization. But the humans had shattered that truth not through conquest or intimidation, but by demonstrating something more powerful than fear. They had shown him hope. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Inform all vessels that we're beginning indefinite research operations in this system, and send a message to Imperial Command: the Empire is officially joining the Galactic Research Alliance." As his crew began implementing the new orders, Admiral realized that the age of conquest was over, not because the Empire had been defeated, but because they had discovered something worth pursuing that was infinitely more rewarding than domination. They had discovered the future. And for the first time in his long military career, Admiral found himself smiling with the same genuine joy he had seen in human faces during their first encounter. It was the expression of someone who had discovered that the universe was far more wonderful than they had ever imagined possible. The rule of fear was over. The age of wonder had begun.